KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan, Grady Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you, my friend?
Hello, Colin. How are you today?
Is it good acting or is it bad acting?
Get there. We're going to talk about this.
Fair enough.
We're going to talk about this, my friend.
Fair enough. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, man. It's so funny. I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a couple of weeks, but I like the way it gels with today's topic. I had this experience, and I wanted to know if this has ever happened to you before. So I've talked about this on the show where, I don't know, I feel like I'm jinxing it by just talking about it. Like, I feel like it's going to happen tonight now that I'm kind of vocalizing, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'll be brave. I just feel like I believe in ghosts, right? I totally believe in ghosts. I can't believe of this superficial 3D world that we live in. I know there's more to it, right? It's just like aliens and all that kind of thing. I just know there's more than is confirmed. So I just know I'm going to have a ghost encounter at some point and I'm going to lose my shit. But so the other day, it's the morning time. Kids are in school. Helene's gone at work. Just put Graydon on the bus. I'm in the house a little after 9 o'clock getting coffee. Going to start work at 10 o'clock. Same chill vibe, whatever. In the kitchen, fiddling around. I hear a ruckus upstairs. That usually means that Kiki is terrorizing the cat. You hear them running around upstairs. You hear that.
So she's allowed upstairs now. I haven't been to your house in a couple of years, so she's allowed upstairs.
Oh, yeah,
now?
yeah. The cats just have the run of the place. The cat and the dog.
Well, I know the cats do, but Kiki is also...
Yeah, she has the run of the place. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, once she kind of... Yeah, that's a good point, because you haven't been here in a while. Once she kind of grew out of that puppy phase, because she's going to be 5 in December. So once she grew out of that puppy phase and she wasn't destructive anymore, it was like, yeah, go where you want to go. And she's a good girl. But she does terrorize the cat. And she wants to play with the cat. She doesn't want to hurt the cat, but the cat wants no part of it. Tessa will just bat her in the face a couple of times, and then Kiki will give up and go grab a toy and sulk somewhere. But this went on for a while. I heard the clamor upstairs. They're running around. Kiki's running around and hear the cat hissing. And I'm like, what's going on? Then I just hear Kiki. I don't even hear the cat anymore. And this goes on for minutes on end. So it's a lot longer than usual. Then all of a sudden, quiet, a beat, and then I hear frantic running down the stairs. It's Kiki, rounds through the dining room, runs into the kitchen at full speed, and runs directly past me into the counter. Just can't stop herself. Just runs at full bore into the cabinet. And I'm like, what the... And she's kind of coming... She kind of nods and she kind of half knocked herself out, and she's kind of coming to. And I couldn't tell if she looked excited or scared. But now I'm thinking... What the hell just happened? Was she chased by a ghost? I've never seen Kiki do this before. So I'm like totally shook. So I go into the dining room to go see what the hell went on upstairs. And there's Tessa laying down on one of the dining room chairs like she's been there for hours. So Tessa, it turned out, had nothing to do with any of this. I could tell she was there. She was like asleep and everything like that. So she looked like she was planted in that spot for quite some time. So whatever happened upstairs was between Kiki and what I could only guess is some sort of phantom.
Ethereal ghost.
Of 1219. Yeah. So.
Well, 1219, a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was saying the house number, but
the house number. I'm sorry. I was like, oh, geez. I was like, wow, this is like Indian
That's
style.
really ancient. So has this ever happened to you where the pets, one of the dogs has had this sort of out of nowhere freak out type thing? Because now I'm thinking, Helene swears, by the way, that there's ghosts in the house, that she hears kids laughing and stuff sometimes. It really freaks me out, and I wish you would stop telling me about that kind of stuff. She's been saying that since we moved in. Like, she'll hear that periodically.
But the house is from 1988, right? So it doesn't have this old. Deep. So we have to analyze it. Like, it doesn't have this deep. It wasn't like a Civil War hospital, or, you know what I mean? So
no, exactly.
So there's not that, but maybe the land. Maybe there's something about the land.
It could be.
This is on everywhere on Long Island. I mean, I don't think anything on Long Island's not built on the bones of an Indian person. Yeah.
Yes.
So, which is unfortunately true. It's just sad. There's nowhere to go.
But isn't that you're right, though. And I would extend that. Isn't that the whole Northeast?
Yeah. I mean, it's just totally. I mean,
right.
I really feel like, God, wasn't there a thing with, what's his name? Bobby Flay, when he built his house on Long Island? They were,
yes.
with all the Indian. He's like, fuck it. He
said,
anyway.
Build it anyway.
Yeah. He's like, I don't give a like, that's hardcore, dude. He's like, I don't give a fuck.
It was really controversial because I think there were like archaeological digs and like they came up with all this stuff and, like straight up artifacts. And he was like, I don't give a shit. Just build the house. It was like, at that point, a $4 million house.
So there could be something to that. I don't know. I've always been. Well, I have memories of you and I being younger, and you always especially scaring me with the story, Ray Bradbury and all the different ghost stories and alien stories and this and that. There's something very eerie about dark, and I know you're afraid of the dark, and being alone and nighttime and starlight and moonlight and crescent moons, and I don't know, it's just the silhouette of trees against the night sky. There's just like a lot of creepy shit going on that just adds to this air. Like my neighborhood here in Virginia is just surrounded by woods.
Yeah.
And so when you're walking the dogs or whatever, it's just like you're just looking in all directions. And it's like the village or something. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, the atmosphere, right?
Yeah, I like the scary stuff. Just don't want it in my house. I haven't experienced anything like I'm perplexed sometimes why Treble or Rush are going crazy about something, but then you usually realize it's like, oh, they saw their reflection. Or Treble has beef with like one black dog in our neighborhood, so every black dog she like doesn't trust, so she just barks at every black dog.
They get hang-ups for sure. That's what I'm thinking too. Like I'm a little bit angry. Like if there's a ghost in the house, are you really going to mess with a cute and innocent little doggy? That's kind of malicious. That's could just be too far.
But do you think it could just be that it wasn't any sort of messing, but that she just got scared? She's like, well, who the fuck is this? Like what?
Right.
There's just someone she knows who's supposed to be there and who's not, and all the rest. So it could be, man. I don't know. I mean, dogs are very weird.
Yes.
I've learned that more and more as I've owned them. Like they're very weird, and they're all super individualistic, and they all have their own weird hangups, and
they really do. They're very neurotic, aren't they?
Yeah, Rush is incredible. That's exactly what I always say about Rush. Rush is straight up neurotic. Just straight up.
They have
won't eat when
things.
Treble's like near him. You won't. He like doesn't trust her. Yeah. You have to like hold her in front of him, and then he'll start eating. So she knows that he's not.
Funny.
She's not loose.
I think, is it a neuroses or is it that they are in tune to something more than we have? They're in tune to a different way.
I mean, they're hearing things that we can't hear.
Yeah, perception.
Yeah.
Right. All of that kind of thing. I don't know. There might be some kind of psychic thing but that's a thing I'm looking for incident number 2 because I really want to know more about this. Did Kiki witness something now broad daylight and all that? I don't know. It kind of freaks me out. So this was about 2 weeks ago this happened. So, and of course it was haunting me. The fact that it happened was haunting me all day. I was like, what happened? That was so odd. She never does things like that. It was so random. So, and I just feel like the supernatural, if this stuff does exist, and I believe it does, I feel like they're very, they strike when the iron's hot, and they're never going to come when you're expecting it. They're very good at that. Right? Like I'm looking for that second incident. And when I'm looking and when I'm conscious of that, it's never going to happen. It's going to happen when I least expect it. They're going to take me completely off, by surprise. And I'm a little nervous about it. Because now I could say I half had possibly a ghost incident, although it didn't happen directly to me, kind of did via Kiki. So I don't know. I'm a little bit.
She's your medium.
That's it.
Yeah.
Am I glad it happened to her and not me? I'm going to be honest with you. A little bit.
Yeah, she's traumatized. She still thinks about that to this moment.
That's all she needs is one more thing to be OCD over.
I know. Well, nothing really interesting happening over here. Just hanging out, working, going about my business. Just funny, man. Like being so persnickety with the house. Like I totally understand you much more now. Because we had the remnants of the hurricane, tropical storm situation in Florida coming up here.
Rain.
Nothing ended up happening, but you're kind of like battening down the hatches, and it is a different weird sort of feeling where it's like, oh man, being in San Francisco or in LA, it's like, oh man, an earthquake can just destroy this and it doesn't matter at all as long as I get out. It's like, I don't own this place, who cares?
You don't own it, right?
Right. It's just different when you own it. So I'm like going around the house, making sure everything's good to go. Got the pump going on the pool cover, and
nice.
making sure that's going. And it's just, I don't know. It's so funny how it's a trade-off. I own this place, so I mean that's really awesome, but you have to worry about all these things, and you do worry about them. And I'm so surprised. You know how you drive by people? I mean, it's no offense to anyone, but you drive by people's houses or whatever, or people, and they just don't seem to care very much. They don't really take care of their property, or
sure, of course.
And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, what isn't this like the most fundamental thing you're supposed to care about? Like, whether you live in a little bungalow or a mansion, don't you take pride in it and like want to take good care of it and all the rest? I don't know.
It is a little strange.
Yeah, I just find that weird. I find that you would find it weird that you would own something and then just be like, I'll just leave it up to chance. I don't know if I told you this, but there was like I don't think I did. I don't know why, but for like, so like a politician like 2 years ago went around our neighborhood and put little American flags into the ground in each of front of our houses for like Memorial Day or something.
Oh, wow. Everybody's house?
Yeah, like just like a little, the little cheap flag, like, and tied to it was like his name and like vote for whatever or whatever. So
right.
Some people left them out for a while and then eventually like take them away.
Okay.
And then over time, a few people have just left them out, and then they get, but one person never took it away, so it just fell over, and then it got just weeds growing all over it, and like just people are stepping over it and stuff. And this went on for like a year, and then they're mowing their lawn and all of this, and I'm like, when is someone going to pick up the fucking flag off the ground? And so eventually I did. I just like was walking the dog by, and I was like, fine, I'll take it, and I just and picked it up and put it in the garbage. And I just wondered that. I'm like, how can someone own this place and just walk by that 5,000 times? Not that it's a flag. I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, the flag, you got to fold it.
Right.
I don't give a shit about that. I really don't.
Right.
All I'm saying is that you have this thing that's just sitting there. Don't you? There's another house in my neighborhood where, you know how you put your sapling tree up and then you tie the things to it to like hold it in place, like the stakes.
Yeah, of course.
And then eventually you take those things out. We've been here for a few years. Like you eventually take them out.
Right,
this person hasn't taken theirs out yet, and one is just like stuck in the ground still, and then the other's just hanging from like a branch, like not even in the ground anymore, like broken in half, just dangling there, like on their front lawn. And I'm like, dude, what the fuck? How long is this going to stay like this? It doesn't bother me for the aesthetic. It just bothers me that it doesn't bother you. How does it not bother you? How do you not notice this? Just go and cut it off. Like, I'm going to go and do it myself. There's also been a rag, like a dirty rag in front of this house for like a year, just sitting on like the sidewalk. And I'm like, is anyone going to pick this rag up?
It could be like the smallest thing, but it is odd. Like, doesn't that bother you? Aren't you compelled to pick that? I've taken weeds out of my neighbor's lawn. Like if that little portion of the corner where the street meets the lawn.
Right.
And the curb is there. And there's like a ridiculous weed. It's like, are you seeing how high that weed could get? I'll pick it. I'll just pick it. I can't leave it there. It's just
so you and I are so similar because I'm picking weeds left and right too. And that's the other thing that really bothers me is just, why aren't people weeding? First of all, it's so satisfying. Second of all,
it's so satisfying.
And then it's good. Like when you get it all cleared up, then you're kind of like picking away and like making sure nothing comes up. And there are just people with these huge crab grasses, and they'll even have like flowers and all these beautiful things, but then just weeds growing all. I'm like, what is going on here?
I mean, it's so.
Are you that busy?
Yeah, right. Well, that's the thing. It's like, are you that busy?
So homeownership has been it continues to be a real wild ride because my neighbor, actually, I get along with a few of my neighbors, and he was like, I really admire the way you take care of your house. And I was like, thank you for noticing.
You were saying that. That's the ultimate. I feel like people aren't effusive enough with the compliments. That only encourages.
Well, because, let me give you an example.
Okay.
When I blow my driveway and my sidewalk and whatever, the street in front of my house, I blow it and then I sweep it up. I don't just, how people just some people just mow their lawn and just leave it like on the sidewalk.
Yeah,
it's like, what? There's just certain mores that need to be followed. And so I'm out there with the broom and I'm making, because then if I blow it, I'm just blowing into the next person's space, or I'm just blowing it out into the street, and then it's going to come back to me. It's like, you got to put in the hard work.
That's almost unheard of, sweeping it up. I mean, that is your neighbor. You are priceless in the realm of being a neighbor.
I'm trying to step up. There's a few others in the neighborhood that are at a high level. I think there's 6 or 8 people that I know of that are working at a high level in this neighborhood.
And
those are the targets. Those are my targets. Yeah, and I see them.
Yeah, they see you. Yeah. They see. See, we talk about how far the apple dropped from the tree with Dad, but you have a little bit of that Jerry in you.
We both do in the OCD shit.
Positive.
We both do in the persnickety thing. I don't know how we picked that up from Dad, but we both got that. The girls don't have that. And I would say Mom doesn't really have that either. I think we're both very persnickety people. Yeah, so we did pick that up from Dad. And then the new project, which I wasn't going to do until next year, but I'm doing it this year because it just materializes. I'm getting solar panels on my house.
Oh, that's huge, dude.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I'm buying them straight out, so I don't have to lease them. Big investment, but I feel like it'll pay off over time. Like, I feel like it's a good investment to make with power prices going out of control or whatever.
They're big.
So that's the next big thing we have to we're taking care of there. And the power bill's getting out of control. The power bill sucks. You know,
the energy prices are through the roof. You know, Helene, I may have told you about this. We have a friend who is solar powered. They've been for a while. Like, they were kind of on the cutting edge. I mean, people have been doing it since the 70s, but they create so much power that they have an excess every month or every pay period, and they sell it back to the energy company.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen here. So
you'll actually eventually you'll come out. You'll be in the black. Yeah,
they showed me this plot where it was like, we use a lot of power during the summer because of our heater, pool heater, and because of the pump has to go 24/7. So,
sure,
but during off months, it's like totally low. So they were saying, like, you'll earn all these credits during these months.
Okay.
And then these credits will start paying off when you put the pool in, and then you'll end up paying like August and September, like a little bit, October, and then it'll go back down. So my power bill will go from like several $1,000s probably a year to, I don't know, 1,000 or less a year.
That's not bad.
And then, because my house is kind of awkwardly positioned where I can't get like maximum coverage. So
okay,
but I'm excited about that. It's good to go green and try to do the right thing and lower your own footprint if you can, and also just lower those bills. So yeah, that's the next big homeowner thing that I'm doing. But
it's exciting.
I didn't want to lease them because I was afraid. The big problem people have with leasing them, and I know that's what a lot of people have to do. I'm just a real prodigious saver. So when I want to buy something, I'm able to usually just buy it and then save up again and so on. And the reason I didn't want to do that was because the one downside I was seeing, and this would have drove me fucking crazy. People were saying like my lease of the stuff, or like renting it or whatever, plus the power bill is actually more than we were paying for electricity. And it's like, wow. So I'm like, I can't even put myself in that position. I'll kill myself. So
yeah, what's the point at that?
I had to make the right decision on that. Yeah, exactly.
You won't be beholden to the evil Shinra Corporation anymore.
Right, exactly. And then sell that power back and get some credits. It'll be good.
There you go. Right.
Dig, let's talk about this week's topic. The Shining, 1980 film. I think this was my topic idea. I think we were both surprised that we didn't cover this. Even when I was watching it, I felt like we did cover it. And I kept looking. I Googled probably 5 times just to be sure. Like, I do not see that we've done The Shining on KnockBack, so I don't...
Shocking. I don't know how we've gone this long without it.
Yeah, so it was weird, too, because I rented it on Amazon, and I think it's on HBO Max, but I just don't have it right now.
It is indeed. And
so I rented it on Amazon, and then when I rented it, I was like halfway through the movie when I rented it. So I was like, when did I rent this? Like, what happened here in the past? I watched this. I've seen this movie a million times, but that made me even more nervous that we had done it. But I really don't think we have. So let's do it today.
I was telling Colin, I checked our log list on one of the podcast services, and I got to all the way back to episode 30 or 31, and I couldn't look at the first 30 episodes for some reason. It just would not load. So if it's in the first 30 episodes, I apologize, but I really
it's not. It's definitely not in there.
It can't be.
I remember a lot of those episodes. That was before we even really know what the show was.
Yeah, okay. We were really kind of feeling it out still at that point.
So this is a Stanley Kubrick film, 1980, based on the 1977 Stephen King novel of the same name.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Dave? Let's start. The Shining. Talk to me about it.
I could not even think back to when my relationship with this movie exactly began. It's one of those films that I feel like I've known forever. In all fairness, I probably saw it for the first time or really sat and watched it for the first time when I really started to get interested in film, when I started to become like a proper cinephile, which was sometime in college, I would say in the mid to late 90s. By that time, I was really into movies and all sorts. And it's so crazy, man. Like, I think a lot of people, everybody knows this movie. I was so happy you chose it. We're kind of coming on the cusp of Halloween, so it's nice to talk about a great horror film. And I think a lot of people say this is one of the greatest horror films ever made. And I think that sells it short. I honestly think this is one of the greatest movies ever made, period, of any genre. There is just something about it, and watching it these last couple of times, knowing we're going to do the episode, it's hard to explain, but the movie just feels expensive. You watch it from the opening frames, that opening tracking shot through, over the lake and through the mountains up that winding road to the hotel. There's just so much quality crammed into this movie. You think about those movies that we see with the crazy crowd shots, whether it's this very expensive battle scene with hundreds or even thousands of extras or very expensive CG. But this movie feels like there's so much quality and thoughtfulness and budget crammed into every frame. I mean, every frame of this film. There's just something wonderful about it's just such an engaging experience that every frame of film, the color, the lighting, the acting, the shot composition, the moving camera and the dolly shots and the steady cam and the multiplaning and the follow footage, and it's just the editing and the juxtaposition of shots. There's just so much. Again, like, just every frame is so on purpose. Everything is just with thought. Everything is intentional. It's just so beautiful to watch. And I'll tell you from the outset, a lot of longtime listeners are going to be shocked at this, but I'm telling you, I don't find this movie scary. I really don't. I find it it's eerie. There's foreboding. It's definitely fraught with tension. I would say it's more of a thriller for me. I think the movie is just so beautifully done that it kind of dilutes the horror for me a little bit. I just want to watch it. Like, it's so wonderfully crafted that I would probably go on a limb right now. Of course, I'm very high on The Shining right now because I'm fresh off watching it a couple of times again. I would say maybe pound for pound, it's one of the greatest movies ever made. I mean, it's just that brilliantly done. And you don't think about horror movies like that. There's some brilliantly done horror movies. I think of things like that are special, like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Ari Aster's Hereditary, horror movies that sort of transcend the usual quote unquote horror fare. But The Shining is still, and dating back decades to 1980s, still, I think, the shining example of no pun, of just an amazing movie. I cannot even believe how well this movie holds up. And there's very few things that I think, besides the fashion and the styles and the cars and the clothing and stuff, that date it. I mean, it's that. If you haven't seen this movie, you have to drop everything. I would rarely say this and go watch it immediately. I want my 15-year-old to watch it because she's into horror films and she still hasn't seen it. And I don't know. She may find it frightening. I'm not sure. But man, for me, I was just so happy to go back and watch this movie. And again, it just puts me down that Stanley Kubrick rabbit hole too. I mean, of just an ingenious, not only a genius, but an ingenious work of art. This movie is just, for me, a no-brainer.
It's funny, man. You really encapsulated a lot of what I was walking away from this particular reviewing of the movie myself with, which was just the aesthetic. And you really explained it so well. Everything is difficult. It seems like everything is symmetrical and the color is intentional and the way it's all reading. is intentional, and that's why I think there are two things that I think add a lot of gravitas to this movie. First of all, Stanley Kubrick. I don't know a lot about him. I've probably seen like 5 or 6 of his movies, right? You have Full Metal Jacket, of course. You have, here, I have a list here. Yes, Dr. Strangelove, Space Odyssey, Clockwork Orange. We know all these movies. But there's something about a guy who very deliberately just moves very slowly from project to project, where he does, I think, 13 movies from 1952 to 1999.
It's insane.
I mean, Stanley Kubrick, and of course he was very busy doing the moon landings as well. But there's something very appealing to me about that, where it's like, you think about this for years, don't you? Like, you think about these things for a really long time. I think The Shining is an interesting example of that coming out, where it's not really his story, although he reworked it, and it kind of came quick on the back of the book. I don't know about the optioning of it. I didn't research too much about the movie itself. I must say that I did that with some intent, because this movie is so covered everywhere that it's like, well, I'm just going to say original things. I don't need to regurgitate all the facts about the movie. But I find that intriguing. That's auteur level, Kojima style. We're going to do this, and we're going to obsess over it now. And it's the antithesis of George Lucas. Now, no offense to George Lucas, but it's just very different, where it's, well, he was very deliberate too, but not so much. I mean, it's like, I'm going to make toys, and I'm going to make TV shows, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And it's just very different. This level of approach is respectable, because that's the man with the big swinging dick, right? That's the guy that says, like, I'm not worried about anything. I'll do the next movie when it's ready. I can do whatever I want. And so there's that. And then the other thing that I think is interesting about it is just the level of performance in the movie, specifically from the protagonist. I think there's uneven performances throughout the movie, but that through line of the believable protagonist is essential to this movie reading right. And very similar to Resident Evil or Dead Space, great video game horror, this is one of those very similar to, let me think here, a movie similar to like Rosemary's Baby, where the apartment building is kind of like a character. Here, the hotel is its own character.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
It's just, I love it. I've seen this movie so many times. I think the reason why it's not scary to us, and I can't speak to you, but I think the reason why it's not scary is just because it can't be anymore. You just know it too well, but there's something still foreboding about it. The music, the pitch, like there's the sound. I take something from it every time I watch it. And I think one of the things I took from it this time was the soundscape, that piercing noise that goes up and up and up and up and up and up and up in that one scene. We actually had to mute it because the dogs were freaking out.
Were they really?
Yeah. And I also don't remember the intro, that iconic intro on the helicopter.
Oh,
getting that awesome shot. And that's what I love about it, is like, this isn't a drone. You know, these shots would be so trivial today. There's so much, or not so trivial, but they would be trivial in comparison to how they got these shots. We were talking about the same thing with that awesome helicopter shot in the intro of Lethal Weapon. But there's just something about the sound and the foreboding immediately from the beginning of the movie that they introduce, even though it's idyllic, it doesn't sound idyllic. There's something obviously wrong. It's just very well set up. And so it's just amazing that, he only made 2 movies after this.
It's amazing.
And they're both classic movies, but I don't know. I don't know if that vibes with people, but there's something about the guy that doesn't work all the time. There's something about, I think that's why people like J.D. Salinger. I've often said, and we should do Catcher in the Rye one day.
That would be awesome.
I read Catcher in the Rye several times. I read it in one sitting at Dana's house when I was in her old house when I was in college. And I'm like, I don't get this book. Like, I don't really understand why this book exists. And then I became really obsessed with J.D. Salinger himself. And as far as this guy is just like, fuck it. He did a few thises and that's, but there's like a whole documentary people can watch about people trying to find him and talk to him.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. And that to me, I'm like, that's so appealing, regardless of how I feel even about your work. It is so appealing that you were just like, I'm done.
Yeah, mic drop. Yeah. Every project is a mic drop until the next one.
It's so I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's kind of how I feel about Kubrick and how I feel about this movie. Is just, it feels like something. It's to what you said. It's not a product. It's a work of art that was created for your, not consumption, but understanding and almost enduring of what it's trying to do. And I think that's really neat.
It's awe-inspiring. I mean, it really is an awe-inspiring film. I find all of his films generally awe-inspiring. I mean, you could go back to 2001, Barry Lyndon. Later on, I'm obsessed with Eyes Wide Shut. Of course, Full Metal Jacket. We'll do it eventually. He just, and a guy that would plan a film for 5, 10, 15 years. He was working on, they shot The Shining for, I think, close to 13 months, which is unheard of. That's torture for a crew and the performers. But he was working on this movie for years. I mean, that's why when you get to shooting and when you get to production, he already put so much legwork in and had, everything sort of cultivated and arranged and organized. So, it's one of those guys where, and it's not a wank. You know what I mean? The proof's in the pudding. The proof is in the final product. Look how wonderful this movie is. And then you hear the other greatest filmmakers of our time, Martin Scorsese, Francis Coppola, gush about this guy and The Shining and Barry Lyndon and his genius and how he would.
I never saw Barry Lyndon. I never saw that movie.
You would love it because it's a really immersive period piece. A lot of people say it's boring. I think Martin Scorsese said it's like one of the greatest movies of all time. It's definitely worth seeing. Ryan O'Neal at his prime.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that.
Leon Vitali started and all that kind of stuff. Really, I mean, I think you would definitely enjoy it, Kyle. But, one of those guys who, and wouldn't embrace a project unless he was really 110% feeling it. There was no milking it. There was no doing something. There was no doing one for them and one for me. There was none of that. Everything was, of the utmost, and everything was important. There was no hierarchy to the things he did. Everything had to be amazing. And that, I think it's that perfectionism that's, and the OCD and whatever compulsion and all that kind of thing to do something meaningful. That is rare. It's Salinger-esque. It is, where it's like every project had to be a mic drop. And, maybe even being a little hampered by that perfectionism where you couldn't do something. You had to, that procrastination, the perfectionism, whatever it is, the genius, all of the, doing, seriously, how many films could Kubrick do where he's running this type of ship? Every take, every other take is 150 takes. Every scene is, you know what I mean? You put your actors through a ringer. How much could you possibly do that to yourself, a cast, a crew? But yeah, I mean, by the time he passed, I guess he passed in 99, right?
Yeah.
Before Eyes Wide Shut even came out, I believe. Yeah, just amazing, fascinating. I just want to. I'm really at the point where I just want to read a bunch of books on him, get into that. The chess player, the still photographer, the young New Yorker, moved his family to England because he was afraid of the atom bomb and nuclear war. Like, just a fascinating individual. So much behind. And then, of course, you get into the players, get into the project, the horror, Stephen King. There's so many layers to this conversation. There's so many different ways we could take it.
Yeah, you're right. Like, there are different ways, because we can talk about The Man, we can talk about the other projects. Obviously, we want to really focus in on The Shining. I think one of the interesting things I noted when I was just kind of looking at the raw statistics of the film was how expensive it was. It cost almost $20 million to make this movie. That's a lot of money. Back then, to make a movie, that's a lot of money to make a movie like this. I think today, I mean,
yeah,
it's a pretty modest budget, but you can make a movie like The Shining for a lot less than $20 million. But that goes to show you the high level of control, I guess, he had over making sure it was right. What do you think about his exacting nature? This is something Micah brought up to me actually when we were watching it, that she was reading about that, and that Shelley Duvall, I guess, apparently really got shaken by the whole experience, and which is such a shame because her role is arguably the weakest in the movie too. So it's just a shame that it took so much out of her, and she put so much of herself into it, but it still didn't play as well as the guys that were probably less injured by Kubrick's style. But what do you think about that exacting nature, the 150 takes, the obsessive symbolism, the symmetry and the color and all the what do you think of all that?
Yeah, there's something about Kubrick where I think if you're that level of perfectionist, you're an auteur, right? And so serious about your craft. And basically, you're helming the ship. So you're holding everybody around you, everybody in your orbits being held up to that same standard. So if you're going to be on his crew, if you're going to be a cameraman, if you're going to be a second AD, if you're going to be a player, if you're going to be his assistant, I mean, his longtime assistant, Leon Vitali, did a whole documentary on working with him over 25 years. You have to be up to that same amount of rigor. You know, he holds you to that standard, and you better be on board for it. I mean, running amok and making, you know, basically the brutal way he treated his actors because he wanted that performance. He wanted Shelley Duvall to be expended. He wanted her to be exhausted. And that was all, I think, really intentional on his part to really batter her, to make her look like she's this horrified, exhausted mom trying to save her son from this homicidal husband. And I think Jack Nicholson already kind of came with that thing. They said he wouldn't even sleep. You know, he'd just kind of go back to the hotel, stay up all night, report for his calls like 30 seconds before he had to be there, and just,
that's awesome.
You know, so he was already doing that. He was already down for that.
It's like a method.
You know, the whole method thing. And really with Stanley Kubrick, it's interesting because you could see nothing is random. Nothing is put in the frame that wasn't intended to be there, whether it was for color or composition. You already talked about his very symmetrical sort of framing, very Wes Anderson-esque. Everything's centered. Everything's at right angles. Everything is sort of exaggerated for that sense of scale and that oppressive, you know, haunting.
Yeah, it's a brutalist. It's brutalism almost. It is those 90-degree angles. You're absolutely right. There's something
and the
beautiful
symbolism,
about
right? Like they say, like, all right, the moon landing. That's all been, you know, this he was, you know, symbolizing or kind of admitting to everybody through all the symbolism that he's the one who faked the moon landing and all this kind of stuff. But there is, and Leon Vitali and Vivian Kubrick and everything have kind of debunked those things over the years. But there are things in there that are very intentional, like the number 42. The number 42 is all over this film. It's on Danny's sweater. The amount of cars in the parking lot. They're showing the summer of 42 on the television. Room 237, if you multiply those numbers together, adds up to 42. These things were in there on purpose. Now, was it some Freudian thing of just scaring people with repeating numbers, or was there a deeper meaning? Was it pointing to 1942 and the Holocaust and, you know, that type of thing, where it was like that was the date that the Nazis decided that they would annihilate Jews? And, you know, what so he gave us so much to talk about, and he did it right up into his last project with Eyes Wide Shut. It's the same type of thing. You know, it was like, was he just telling a story, or does it run much deeper than that? And I think we'll be talking about it because he was purposely very obtuse about all this type of stuff outside of the craft, that I think we'll be talking about it forever. You know, that's why there's so many layers to his film. And again, just putting that loving touch into every frame. For me, Kyle, it struck me, especially with the moving camera and the Steadicam. The Steadicam was a new thing in the late 70s. And the dolly shots and the tracking and having a speedometer on the wheelchair for the Steadicam to make sure they never went over 6.2 miles an hour, and just how fluid and beautiful everything looks. It seemed to me, it's like watching, you know, a sort of low budget television animated series versus watching a full-blown multi-million-dollar feature animated film, where you could do the lush fluid movement. Everything is beautiful. Everything is done just so. That's what a Kubrick film feels like to me, especially The Shining, where it's like you didn't have to move the camera is moving so much in this film, which is a very expensive and timely thing to do, especially when you're coordinating that with performances and takes and timing and lighting. and people, actors hitting their marks, and especially the lengthier shots. This is all very, very difficult. I think you said it well, and you could just see the money and the thoughtfulness in every frame. Again, it's like every moment of this film is just filled with just people, not only Kubrick, but everyone around him. I think everybody in his orbit, just masters of their craft. And if they weren't, they were going to do it until they got it right, according to him. And I think that's why we're still talking about The Shining. And I do think that's what makes this movie less scary, is that you just get lost in that, especially as a cinephile. You just get lost in how beautifully it's done and executed.
Absolutely. I just, as an artist, I guess, I mean, I'm a writer, but I guess we are artists in our own way. I can't actually draw anything. I'm not comfortable talking about myself that way, but as someone in the humanities, let's say.
Sure. Yeah.
You develop a greater and greater eye for those things. And that's what I think is so fascinating. Or one of the things that's so fascinating about The Shining is that even at 2+ hours, there is no wasted time. I could spend another hour in this universe. In fact, this universe could be, or this period could be a mini series to me, and I would love it. And it's one of the, I'm glad you get in and out. You see what you see, but man, I would love to see more. I'd like to see the meltdown slower. I'd like to see more of all the different, the different components of the characters and this slow melting down of Jack at this hotel. But I don't know, man. One of the things you said resonated with me too, which was that Kubrick was very mute about these things when he was alive. And I think that that's so essential. I think a lot of writers, I know I am one, we want people to get to the subtext and find the hidden meanings and all of those kinds of things. But an important component of that is being a writer that people care about enough to discover those things and keeping the mystery such that there is no answer. And that, I think, has contributed to Kubrick. Because one of the things I was reading was how the movie wasn't very well received compared to the way it was received later. And I think that part of that must be the way we look at Kubrick over time, not just the film itself, that it wasn't really celebrated then. It was only celebrated when we got to know it. And we got to know it as a component of entertainment that now has existed for more than 40 years. And in that dissection of it, and in the nebulousness in the way it was left by him, I think that allows it to stand up to the test of time. Very similar to the way Rod Serling was about Twilight Zone and others, where there's always going to be an element of mystery, and the mystery is baked in, and that's part of the fun. And what was that documentary, Room 237?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it in a long time. I got to go back and watch it again. It's well over 10 years old, I think now. Maybe closer to like 15 years old.
Yeah, I think so.
But if people are interested, that's a documentary, and there are others, I think, but a documentary that goes into a lot of the symbolism of the Indian, the symbolism of all of the shit that you're seeing in the movie, with some cinephiles and experts and whatever that maybe aren't seeing things for what they are and are probably not seeing things that are really there. But to Dagan's point, I think are seeing things that truly are there. And I love that. And to your point of the expensiveness of it, because I wrote that, I did my little typed up note thing again, like I did with Lost. And I wrote the highest possible quality, everything, it shows. And let's talk about the resort, the stunning resort, the Overlook Hotel, Colorado. Interesting setting. What do you make of this? First of all, I guess the opening sequence is trying to really implant in you the isolated nature of this location. And I think they do that really effective job of that. I love the shot when it comes in and you see it for the first time, very Castlevania-esque of like seeing the castle and getting this, panning shot of it. What do you make of the Overlook Hotel and how they present this place that they'll be trapped in this coming winter?
Yeah, it really is a character in the film, and it's so interesting. Like it's a place so foreign to us, being in the mountains. I don't think I've ever even been to Colorado, so there's something really exotic about it for somebody from the Northeast, from the ocean.
Interesting spot.
Yeah, it really is. And I know they filmed it in Oregon, and they filmed it partially in actual Colorado, and then I think the Highway to the Sun in Montana. So really interesting places. But supposedly up in the Rockies, it starts off. I love how they kind of started off as it seems relatively pedestrian. It's old. At that point, it's close to 100 years old. It's 80 years old. So it's an old place built in the early 1900s. So it's already got that. At first, it feels like maybe old-timey charm. And then I love the way, as the movie progresses, and sort of quickly, once the family is up there and isolated for the winter, it sort of grows into a place that goes from being sort of pedestrian or harmless to being something that seems almost malevolent in some way. You know what I mean? Like it seems malevolent, rather. It seems like it's actually a place that is harboring evil, if not evil itself. And I love the way they do that with Stanley Kubrick, just the way he shows everything, the way he shoots everything, what's included in the shot. Sometimes it might not be for some symbolic purpose, but everything is in there for some sort of meaning, whether it's composition or color or story building or character building, or just something in there to make you feel uneasy or on edge. There's a great scene where Danny's sitting with Mr. Halloran and they're having ice cream, and there's a rack of knives in the background directly above Danny's head, all pointing down to him, all very sharp butcher knives pointing directly down. Everything feels threatening at a certain point. The hard angles, everything's 90 degrees, everything feels sharp. And I think when you add what you were saying, Kyle, the sound effects and the music, the score, which is really haunting, really creates somewhere where you feel these people are in peril just for being there. It's cold, it's harsh, it feels like they're almost like a giant monster. Even the elevator bays, the way they look like faces, eyes with mouths, everything feels like it's going to swallow them up. Everything feels like it's out to get them. And I just love the way they do that, but it's not some sort of Tim Burton, Alice in Wonderland type fantasy where these things actually look like some sort of hybrid monster. It looks like a regular place, but the way you can make it look so threatening, just with how you frame it and show the scale and show that, this is a place that nobody should be. It's quite brilliant. And I think when you add on top of that, when you add the fact that it's old and old-timey and antiquated and a little bit out of style, I think that adds another layer of just creepiness to the whole thing, which I think that might even only get exaggerated more and more as time goes on, as we get further away from the late 70s, or, indeed, it looks like this place is kind of steeped in the 30s in some way. So it already looked like it was 50 years old. Now we're watching it in 2022. It looks like exceptionally creepy.
Yeah, it's old. 1907, I think he says they broke ground. 1910,
Sure.
They finished. And he was saying that they were fighting Indians while they were building it. So it goes to show you it was still the late Indian War era. I think one of the things that makes the beginning of the movie so scary too is that you see people, lots of people, and that everyone you meet, or the few people you meet, are friendly. And so it puts up this like patina of normalcy, that everything's actually okay, but obviously something's going to go awry. One of the things that they focus on in that so-called interview scene, the interview.
Yeah.
And they say the winters can be fantastically cruel. And they talk about this so-called the tremendous sense of isolation, and solitude and isolation can itself become a problem. He says, what do you think about isolation, generally speaking? Does it scare you? Or is it something that you'd be into? Like if you were in that situation, would you? Because I look at that and I'm like, man, that would be awesome to be like the caretaker of some sort of massive old hotel. You might be able to have a few people with you, your family or whatever, and you're just dicking around for 5 months, and your job is just take care of this place, turn the heat on and off, run the water here and there. They're feeding you. I'm like, this is awesome. But I think that the sense of isolation is magnified heavily. See, this is what we talk about this all the time, Jake, but this is what makes horror so hard to do in contemporary times, because you would have to write so many things into the story to make sure that they could never get in touch with the outside world today. Like this wouldn't see if you were like, Colin, do you want to be isolated in 2022 into 2023 in this hotel in Colorado and take care of it? I'm like, yeah, dude, we'll get fucking Starlink. I'll have, probably fiber optic internet, and like, what else am I going to need? It'll be great. But Here, they don't really have to go out of their way to sever all ties. They write in just a few lines. Oh, the phone lines are typically down for months this time of year. Oh, we have a radio, but you need to keep the CB on and be near it to talk to the park rangers. Oh, we have TV, but it's over the air. So you're going to get weather reports, but you're not really going to be able to react or respond to anything. So what do you think about that sense of isolation, both during that time and today? Because I think they're two very different things, but I must say that they're both intriguing to me.
Yeah, the time difference would make it a lot different comparing now to 1980 because the technology at our fingertips, even if we weren't isolated, we're not truly isolated because we have, the internet, social media, satellite, television, all these things at our fingertips. But back then it is a different story. I mean, there's something sort of charming about being holed up, sort of self-contained. You have an unlimited amount of food. You could live up there for many times over the 5-month period you have to be up there. You want for nothing. You even have, you have all the space to move around, even inside. You even have a game room. There's recreation. There's plenty at your fingertips. And you have each other. You're that small family, whatever, but you have each other there. And you could be together or isolate as you want to in this big facility, a big building. So it seems kind of charming. For me, I think I know how I like it best. I wouldn't want to be isolated tens of miles, maybe even 100 miles from like the nearest civilization and knowing at some point there's going to be enough snow where nobody's going to be able to get to us for a certain amount of time. I think that sort of thing would make me very uneasy even today. My preference, if I have my druthers, is I like to be alone. I like to be sort of self-contained and isolated and just kind of be away from people, but I still want the people and the places and the stores that's something at like arm's reach. I still want to be able to be close enough where if there was like an emergency or if we needed police assistance or fire assistance or whatever, that we wouldn't just be doomed. I think that sort of thing would weigh on me and I would probably be anxious about that. So having that, but having it, just so where I could leverage those things if I needed them. But if I was in the Torrance's situation, yeah, I would definitely. I mean, that makes me nervous just watching the movie. It's like, wow, the forest rangers are basically saying to you, those rangers up there are saying like, there's going to be a period of time where no one's going to be able to get to you. Leave your radio on, but the only way to go up Sidewinder, which is in a 30-mile extension of highways with these treaded snow cats, which are these slow lumbering snow vehicles that could traverse the snow when you can't use an automobile or whatever. That would definitely make me nervous. And it's interesting too, because with the Jack character, it's almost like he's embracing that from the beginning. And even speaking for his family without them there, and Wendy later admits, like, I was scared at first, but of course she kowtows and kind of goes with the flow and doesn't want to rock the boat. But, even from the beginning, you're like, oh, he's a little too into this. Like he's a writer. He needs isolation. He's kind of frustrated. He's trying to take on a project. He can't really do it. So he thinks the isolation will do him good. But it is interesting that to see a human being like that would go in for that. And I know they exist, but it's kind of far from how I would feel about it, especially in 1980, where it's like you're saying, like you're going to get like maybe one UHF TV channel and you're going to really be holed in with nobody else around from October through April. So you have to endure that the better part of half a year. That's a long time, man. It's also a long time to make your family like, why did the family have to be there with him?
Well, right. There's a few questions. I mean, because the next thing I wanted to bring up was the apartment scene or the apartment scenes with Wendy and the therapist or the doctor, not the therapist, the doctor.
Sure.
That's looking into Danny's condition, I guess. I love these scenes. The scene in the apartment just strewn in books is really cool. Just books stacked everywhere and so on and so forth. What are we learning about them during this scene? I mean, we don't learn very much about Jack, but Jack sounds like he's insane. And it's so interesting because she's basically talking about how boy was abused, or at least found himself abused during this alcoholic, tumultuous time and he hadn't had a drop of alcohol in a while. But what do you think about those? Those are probably some of the more unsettling scenes to me, actually. The one with the doctor watching her face and her affect. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, you get a little bit of Jack's origins here, and we learn a little bit. Now, have you read the book?
I've never read the book.
Novel?
I've never read the book.
Okay. I read the novel years ago, and because I love Kubrick and I love The Shining specifically, I went back and delved back into the audiobook and listened to that a couple of years ago. And just to explore the differences in Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick's famous, not battle, but talking bad, I guess kind of battle with each other, and then exploring differences between the novel and the book. The novel gives you a little more. And of course, Kubrick wants to be a little more obtuse and show, not tell. I think he's a much better craftsman than Stephen King in general. I think you could also argue Stanley Kubrick's a better writer than Stephen King, but
they're the antithesis of each other.
They really are.
It really is interesting that they came together. We've said it before. Stephen King is just I can't take that seriously when you make that much stuff. It's hard for me to take you seriously. Like I understand he is a renowned American author. I am nothing compared to Stephen King. I'm not saying that. I just can't take you seriously when you basically seem to have a finger on a keyboard at all times. How can that be?
It's crazy how prolific he is.
I just don't understand how that can be.
It's really something. And I've watched modern things with Stephen King talking with certain authors and doing panels and doing interviews. He's friends with George R.R. Martin. And they do shows together where they have conversations, which is really interesting. But I was interested to learn this was only Stephen King's third published book. I guess he did Carrie and something else before this.
Yeah, it's one of his early works. I do remember that.
So he wasn't, he was off to the races, but he wasn't Stephen King proper yet. But it is interesting, dude, like to see Jack, you get just enough of Jack where he's on the wagon, eventually you find out he's a recovering alcoholic. This point in the film with the doctor, Wendy describes the incident where he hurt Danny's arm. And at that point, it already does seem like Jack is a little unhinged. He's talking about the Donner Party to his 5-year-old. He seems a little, not complacent, but he seems generally distracted. He's got this alcoholism problem eventually. And you found out that he ran afoul of the kid at least once and hurt his arm. And the doctor looks extremely concerned. They moved to Colorado from Vermont. Jack was once a teacher. You don't know exactly what happened. The book explores that a little more, where he gets into an actual physical altercation with a student and basically is kind of run out of the school because he basically assaulted a younger guy. I don't know if he was a college professor or a high school teacher in the book. I think he was a college professor in the book. And so you learn about all these things and you're kind of wondering, is the dad on the up and up? Is he just a frustrated writer? Is there something more sinister going on behind all this? But I like the doctor scene because it does, like you said, it shows you their apartment. They live, looks like they're of meager means. They live in an apartment that just has detached bedrooms, but the living room, sort of family room, kitchen area is like one big space.
Yeah, it's like a studio-esque kind of situation.
Kind of studio-esque with a bedroom or two thrown in, and there's stacks of books. There's nothing really nice. Everything's very lean. It's not really decorated in any way. It's kind of thrown together and cheap. And the doctor seems concerned. Danny has this imaginary friend. He passed out while having a conversation with him. Is something physical going on? Is there some sort of mental or psychological issue with the kid? So at this point in the film, this is getting all spelled out. And I think Shelley Duvall's performance comes into this as well, because she seems like a caring, loving mom. I mean, she's chain smoking. She seems a little bit, she seemed, that was the 80s. That was more socially acceptable then. But she seems to be meek, right? Like she seems to be, she's not the one calling the shots, right? She seems to just be giving her husband the benefit of the doubt. She's making excuses for him. So you're kind of wondering, really in the center of all this, what's going to happen with the kid? You know what I mean? Why is he the way he is? Why does he seem like he seems disturbed? And, you're at that point in the film, the whole conversation with the doctor and the examination and everything, you're wondering, all right, what's really happening with this kid? And then, of course, when they get up to the top, when they get up to the hotel and they're isolated, then that's when shit really hits the fan.
Talk to me a little bit about what you think what you think is wrong with the kid. Like, how do you understand the condition that he experiences? Because let me look at my notes here. When who is it? Dick? That's the black guy, right?
Yeah.
I have it written down here. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
When Dick talks to Doc, and obviously they're communicating psychically as well, because he garners his name or his nickname and all of that. And they I'm confused by what is actually going on in this respect. And I was wondering what you make of it, because it's discussed as being an almost dreamlike state. But Doc talks about how it allows his grandmother had it, and it seemed like it was just them, but he's encountered other people with this, and it's kind of like more about telepathy and communication. I'm a little confused about this whole thing. I'm wondering if what your take is on it. Again, I haven't gone and read like the plot synopsis or whatever, or someone explaining what the actual Shining is. But how do you understand it? Because I'm a little bit lost here on that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a deeper sort of association with it because I read the novel and they explain it a little more in that, or they flesh it out a little more. Stephen King fleshes out a little more in the book. Now, the thing with going from book to film is that you don't even know what the intention is, because, again, Kubrick tends to be a lot more obtuse and cryptic about things. And, he's one of those guys who holds his cards closer to his chest. The magician doesn't tell his tricks. Again, much different than Stephen King. But I always understood The Shining. I know it was derived, or Stephen King at least derived it from the John Lennon song about, we all shine on, which is a 1970 Yoko John song, right? And that it was basically the psychic ability to communicate wordlessly. And also in there somewhere is also the ability to see things, visions, or glimpses into the future. And now you get this also from the sequel film and book, Dr. Sleep, where that whole thing centers around an adult Danny dealing with The Shining and a kid that he helps and all that. I don't want to ruin it for anybody.
Yeah, I've never.
Also involves vampires.
I gotta write that down. I forgot that.
I'll tell you something, man. I didn't read Dr. Sleep. I don't know, when did that come out? 2012 or
it was more recently. I thought, yeah, something like that.
And then they quickly did the movie. Ewan McGregor stars in it. I gotta say, not only is that I didn't read the book. The film scary and embraces the Kubrick film in reimagining actual images, characters, and stuff from that film, which I think is interesting with all the infighting with King and Kubrick over the years that they would do that. But it does. And it really does explain The Shining more. It also involves vampires, which sounds cheesy and unexpected, but it works. I will say it works. The vampires are actually frightening in that, especially the lead vampire. You
know how I feel about vampires.
Good shit.
Talk to me a little bit about the Stephen King Kubrick infighting. What is the nature of what's going on here between the two of them? I know that the vision for the story is totally out of whack between the two of them, as I understand it. And to me, it always, just very casually, it reads to me a little bit like Stephen King being upset that people think the rendition of his story in film form is better or is iconic.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with him, really. Because it's not even really the truest interpretation of what his work. So I think that Stephen King's social media presence strikes me as being a complete egomaniac. And so
really, on Twitter?
He's just very much about himself, like just very much talking about whatever, like just alienating people and doing, it's like, okay, it's Stephen King. I guess I didn't know that was like what you're all about. So I just feel like I could see someone like him having a contention with a more deliberate auteur style creator.
Yeah, kind of a blowhard, I guess. It is interesting because you said it perfectly earlier, Kyle. They seem like such different, disparate personalities, these two. I don't know much about Stephen King, and to be honest with you, I've seen more of his movies than I've read his books, but he always seems to be coming from a place where I think, especially early on, I'm not sure what his religious affiliation is or what his history is with religion, but he seems to be coming from a place that always honored traditional religion. I think there was more of, I don't want to say, there was more of a warmth and less of a mean-spiritedness in his movies, I think. And I think a tendency to want to wrap things up in a pretty bow. I think kind of far removed from traditional great literature. Like, he's not of that school, you know, like he's not coming from that place of, you know, like an Ivy League writer, if that makes sense, like a writer's writer. You know, he's coming from a more commercial place, I think is a proper way to say it. And I think he's happy being, he's almost like a comic book writer in novel form. And I don't mean that disparagingly, but it's more of an entertainment resonance. It's more of a popcorny type of style than something that's more literary. And I think Stanley Kubrick is the exact opposite. So I love the stories about Stanley Kubrick wanting to do a horror film in the 70s and getting all these books. And his secretary would say Stanley would be in his office and he would just take one of these books after the next, open it up, read a couple pages and throw it. And she would hear the books hitting the wall all day because they sucked to him. So he picked up The Shining, and something, I think he said he read it cover to cover, and something in there clicked with him. He obviously liked it in some way in order to want to take it on as a project, knowing Kubrick's history and not just doing anything, waiting for the proper vehicle for him. But I think, you know, he does make a lot of changes, and he kind of puts the emphasis more on the kid and less on the father character. I think there's a lot of other overarching differences. The mom is very different. Now, if you guys want to see something, they did a 1997 3-part, if I'm not mistaken, miniseries of The Shining, made for TV. Bad idea already, because you're redoing a classic. It's like redoing Willy Wonka, right? Even if it's Tim Burton, there's no promises there.
And you're redoing it only 17 years later. Yeah, and
on the budget, on a cheaper budget, on a shoestring compared to feature. You're doing it for television. You can make it longer, which is something that you said, Kyle, you would like to see. But the cast, I mean, it's just
Kubrick's. I want to see Kubrick's longer, by the way.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is I don't remember it that well, but just watching clips of it, it's a very watered down, very homogenized version of the film. But it follows the book more closely. So the Wendy character is more empowered. She's less of a pushover. That's okay. Like, you could do that. You could be more do something more faithful to the book. That's okay. But I think Stephen King saying that it was cold, you know, the movie was cold. It lacked the warmth of the novel. The Wendy character was extremely misogynistic. The craziest thing I heard King say about this, and he really did say this, was that he felt like Stanley Kubrick made a film to intentionally hurt people. I thought that was a really heavy thing to say. Like, he said, what he was basically saying was that what Stanley Kubrick created was evil and mean-spirited, and that it was sort of this insidious version of what he was trying to create in the novel, which I think is those are fighting words, right?
Yeah, that's weird too. That's a weird thing to say. That's weird
to say that somebody created something that would. And I've heard Ari Aster say, you know, he's very inspired by The Shining and Kubrick in general, and he said that about The Shining. Like, that was one of the movies he felt like he was watching something evil, that he was watching something that felt malevolent. It's funny. I don't feel like it's like that. I feel like it's the artistic version of a horror film. And I really think because of that, it turns out to be more of a thriller. I think you made a great point earlier, though, Kyle. I think it's one of those films I would love to go back and just erase my memory and see for the first time, because I do think because we're examining it and we're obsessing over it, and there's 9,000 YouTube videos trying to pull it apart and explore its meaning and the hidden symbolism and all that it does by that nature get diluted. It becomes almost pop culture-y at that point. And I'm sure there's Grady Twins pop vinyls and shit like that, So it is kind of pop culture-y, but that doesn't make it any less of a work of art. You know what I mean? It's like a Rembrandt or a Monet or a Picasso. Everybody knows those paintings. We have postcards on the fridge of those famous Renoirs and all that, but it's still a work of art. And I think that's what Stephen King's missing. Stephen King, I mean, he's a pop culture icon, and I like a lot of what he's done, but it does seem like to say it in a breath, I think Stephen King is quantity over quality, and I think Stanley Kubrick is the exact opposite. So when you put these two personalities, these two artists together, I think heads are going to butt, right? It's just like, but it's almost fun because it's fun to see what Stanley Kubrick does with a Stephen King novel. It's not Stanley Kubrick making a Salinger book or The Sound and the Fury or something. It's not the writer equivalent of Stanley Kubrick. It's Stephen King. It's pulp in many ways.
That's
right?
Exactly what I was going to say. Was it does come off as pulpy just in the nature, the rapid nature of the releases is the very definition of pulp novel. Although we don't have those anymore, obviously. But yeah, it is interesting to examine that stylistic difference between the two of them, how they came together. I actually agree a little bit with the Ari Aster idea that there is something. Like, I understand what you mean. Like, it's not that it's cursed. There's some spirit about this movie. This movie clears the field, right? It pops everything away from it. It's noticeable. It's the noticeable one around itself. And that there is something when that is a horror movie, I think that there's something like almost unholy feeling about it. And that's part of, I don't know if anyone disagrees. I'm sure people do. Like, I think about that, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, not so much Hereditary, but Midsummer and a couple other movies as being like truly spiritually unsettling movies. Like down to basics, there's something weird about this entire thing. And like not only the story, but the act of watching the story, the act of the story existing the way it does. Like Midsummer was the last time I saw a movie where I was like, that is the most fucked up thing I've ever seen, or like one of the most fucked up things and it's horrifying. And then I watched it over and over again. I mean, that's one of the few movies where I watched it probably 5 times.
Oh, did you really?
In like the last few years. Yeah.
It's special.
So I feel like this movie does have that kind of spirit. But again, I don't know if it's because of the high quality bar, because that's what those two things share as well. Or if it's because of because that's what connects Rosemary's Baby to these two, which is another, we did that a long time ago. But that movie truly feels fucked to me.
Absolutely.
Like totally fucked.
Great example.
Yeah.
It's a great example. I mean, yeah, I think, Kyle, I think what it is, and I don't think I could do this just because of who I am. I like to fancy myself as a proper artist, but it's about stripping out the sentimentality completely and pulling your punches completely, because there is nothing sentimental about a Stanley Kubrick movie. It's about the art, it's about show don't tell, and it's about telling the story. The only thing sentimental that you could even say is remotely sentimental about the Shining film, 1980 film, is that Wendy and Danny survive, right? But there is a complete lack. Like there's something that shines in Ari Aster's work. And I think Ari Aster is a genius. And I think he's the second coming of like a guy like Kubrick. But there's something somewhat disturbed about Ari Aster. And he'll tell you that. Like he's got issues. You know, he's had family traumas, and he's cathartically putting that into his films. I don't know about, Stanley Kubrick came from a rich family. His dad was a physician. He grew up in the South Bronx in a ritzy neighborhood at that time and all that kind of thing. I don't really know what his past is, but he has that gift of not relying on sentimentality at all. It sounds like a hackneyed conversation to have around a film, but the more you get into film and just being a cinephile, the more you realize there is something that certain filmmakers have that others don't. And, you look at Steven Spielberg, who's also a genius, but he's a sentimental filmmaker. You look at somebody like Stanley Kubrick, he's not afraid to disturb you. He's not afraid to end it on a sour note. He's not afraid to leave you with lingering questions. He's not afraid to haunt you. And I think that really takes a special type of personality. And I would think it's really easy to do when you're taking somebody else's creation and making it your own. Because how attached are you to characters that you didn't create? You're recreating characters, right? Like I could draw a caricature of Superman, and there's something that's unemotional about that because he's not my character. I'm showing you my version of the character. So I think when you give Steven Spielberg a pulp novel of a writer who's generally a commercial dude that you could just find on the spinner racks at the drugstore, and then you Kubrickize it, it's so easy to say, I'm going to go to town on this thing. And I think that's what you're seeing. I think that's really why it feels like that. It feels like, all right, you agreed to watch this, so you're down for anything. Like that's why I'm looking forward to Ari Aster's third film so much, because he has that gift of really leaving those lingering fears, and he disturbs you. You know, these movies really get in your head. Rosemary's Baby is a great example.
Right. Well, that's what I was kind of getting at, was Stephen King's, I guess, criticism of it being mean-spirited or just like truly like this evil thing. It's like, good. What the fuck are you talking about? It's a movie. It's a horror movie, dude.
Sure.
You're complimenting it. You're saying that it's, are you saying that your books don't profoundly haunt people? I know people that are profoundly haunted to this day by Cujo and shit like that, and Pet Sematary and all. It's like, what are you saying? That doesn't even make any sense.
Cujo's a great example. Can you look at a Saint Bernard without thinking about Cujo?
No, I mean, dude,
Stephen King did that to us.
I think that book had a material effect on people in the 80s. Like, I think that book and movie really fucked with people. And isn't that cool? Like, it reminds me a little bit of the Blair Witch Project in the late 90s, and how that took advantage of people's ignorance of found footage and all of this to create an atmosphere where you didn't really understand what you were watching. And it's, even though we know everything about, like, I've seen Blair Witch Project several times. I saw it in the theater with Dana when she was in North Carolina. I remember it very clearly. It was horrifying. We didn't really know what we were seeing. Is it, like what there was this whole mysterious marketing about it, and we know everything about it now, and that there's nothing to it at all. Right. It was intent, but it still has that provenance, and therefore it has that aura about it. Always, it will always have it. That will always make that movie special. And so, the way you're describing it to me sounds like a compliment. To say, like, you made something like you made this movie that is so transcendental, right? That it leaves the movie screen and brings something foreboding and negative into the world, which I think art can do. That's art literally jumping off of the canvas.
Absolutely.
We don't go to horror movies to be uplifted. The fuck are you talking about? I don't go to the horror movies for the great ending. It's just strange. Like, we go because we have this weird human need to be punished, to fear, to be scared, to have adrenaline rushes and all these things. And so that just seems complimentary to me. I wish people said that to me about the things I wrote. It's like, damn, this is fucked. Yeah. Like, that would be a great compliment.
Well, you might get there. My friend. Because what you're saying is it matters. And I think I heard one Stanley Kubrick interview. I don't think there's any stone I've left unturned with Kubrick, especially about this movie. But there was one very rare, unguarded instance. He didn't do a lot of interviews, which was a telephone interview. So it was just audio. And he was saying he took King's movie, which was more about this family trying to triumph over this evil presence, these ghosts and the Indian burial ground, and that playing more into it. I guess more of a tangible, tactile horror. And Kubrick was saying his take was just a straight up like, no, this is a story about evil reincarnation, like this evil cycle of reincarnation. And, not really, even in saying that in the interview, it's left very cryptic in the movie. Yes, it ends on the photo of Jack, this old timey photo from whatever that is, the 20s or whatever, of Jack. So he had been there before, but that was sort of Kubrick's bent on it. Was like, yes, he's kind of playing into that reincarnation of this evil that'll never stop, that this hotel will always have provenance over this man or these men and Grady and the other people that are kind of caught up in that evil cycle, but not having to explain it and not having to put a pretty bow on it. You know what I mean? Like just saying, no, there's evil in the world and it's unexplained, and we don't need to say it's good versus evil. It's Jesus versus Satan, whatever type, angels versus demons. It's not that. It's something more mysterious. And I love that.
Well, that's what makes The Exorcist in particular so tantalizing to me is that I guess it has like a good conclusion, but it says to you like, okay, now you get to go back out into the world with that knowledge, and it's like that's life altering, scarring shit.
That's scarring. That's scary.
And that to me is the essence of art. That dude, I'll always think of The Exorcist and be horrified of it, even though I've seen it a million times. I even know where those fucking flashes of the demon come up so I can avoid it and all that. But it's just the nature of it. And so I see that as like a victory for horror when you are touched by it like that. I mean, that's good shit, man. That means it's not generic and wasteful. It's I don't know. I guess I don't quite understand what people are going in for if that's not what you're going in for. Is
absolutely.
I don't want my life to be ruined. I want my view to be different. I want to see things differently.
Right. You want a movie to, kind of you want a movie to kind of pinprick something at you. Like you want to leave thinking about the experience and having new questions. Those are the things that resonate. And I think the quality of this film, in a way, makes it scary because it feels more real. I wouldn't say realistic, because there is something stylized about it. Definitely. Kubrick had a real style, but I just think the amount of that level of craft in it makes it feel a little more frightening in a way. And it stays with you because those images stay with you. Those images, those frames, the twins standing in the hallway, the blood gushing out of the elevator bays, like those, Dick Halloran taking an axe to the heart, like those images really become ingrained. They become implanted and blazoned in your head, and they don't go away necessarily. You kind of, in a way, you're kind of waiting for something to top it. Nothing has.
What do you think of the themes of like abuse generally? We're talking a little bit about Jack's interactions with Danny and hurting him when he was still drinking and all of that, and the backstory of that. But one of the things I find really hard about this movie to watch is just like his treatment of Wendy. It's like, why do you feel this way about this person? So why do you hate this person so badly? Like there's no really mutual respect ever shown, or very little respect ever shown. And it comes off as, so before the even physical interactions with each other, it comes off as just emotionally manipulative and psychologically abusive. And difficult to watch and hard to kind of not focus in on that when on this abusive relationship, when it's really all the movie shows you in some way between the characters. It's just this very unsettling, tense situation. What do you make of that? It's very hard for me to I like nice people. Even in film, it's hard when people are mean. I don't like when people like each other, and so it's hard for me to like see Wendy trying and Jack kind of rebuffing her at every turn.
I think for me, I gotta say, Kyle, I think one of the meanest spirited characters or performances or moments in a film is when Jack tells Wendy to get the start now by getting the fuck out of here. It makes your heart skip a beat. It's like, holy shit, did he just say that to her? And she, is so, again, meek, that she's just like, okay. And she kind of slowly walks out. You feel so much sympathy for her. In fact, you're looking, when the camera goes back to him, you're looking for that sort of touch of remorse to cross his face, or the fact that he, maybe something will wash over him that looks like he regrets saying that, and he doesn't. He just he just looks stoic and staid, and he goes right back to work. It is one of the most fucked up moments in any film, seeing a husband treat his wife like that. And it was completely uncalled for. Like, she was just like, I was just wondering how it's going, and maybe, I could read that later or whatever, and he just goes off the handle. And that's when things start to really unravel, and you're in for some fucked up shit. Like, this guy is definitely unhinged. And you see little glimpses of that leading up to that moment, but that's when you know that this woman and this child are in danger. That this guy has just completely gone off the reservation. And it's so interesting to me that the one lingering question is, and to me it always just felt like a character trait. Like, she's kind of like, unfortunately, the pushover wife who maybe doesn't know how to defend herself. You're wondering why she stays in this relationship. It's obviously a little unbalanced, and she's mistreated, obviously, in some way. And
Sure.
we also know there's a history of at least one heinous instance of abuse towards the 5-year-old. Maybe it happened when he was 4, which makes it even worse. But beyond that, we do wonder, like, is she staying with him to keep an even keel for the kid? Does she just not really know how to speak for herself? Does she just lack that empowerment? We don't know. It always felt like a character trait. To me, though, Kyle, I think one thing that always resonated for me, at least in the last 10 or 15 years, 20 years, reading the book and seeing the film, is it always seemed like an exploration to me of kind of work-life balance, if that makes sense. Like, balancing career, job, employment, success, expectations with what you do, your craft or your occupation, versus family. It always felt like that to me. Like, that seems to be Jack's source of frustration, is that things aren't going well in his professional life. And it always seemed like a message, or like it was making a comment on balancing work and family. I always thought that. I never heard anyone say that. I never heard King or Kubrick say that. But for me, I always read into it like that. Like, that really seems like this guy could have a good family life. He has a faithful wife. He has a beautiful son. But something's going on where his unhappiness in his work life is not only affecting him, but that unhappiness is affecting his family as well. He's becoming abusive. He's becoming impossible to live with. And in fact, he's becoming homicidal, right? So it always seemed like that to me. Like, that was the source. That was sort of the beginning or the origins of why this man was mentally deteriorating. And I never heard that said, but it always seemed like that to me. You know, he's frustrated. He can't think of things. He can't write. Even his teaching career went belly up. So it's like, what's happening with this man? And that's the only thing I could I forget the book might spell it out a little more, but you could certainly read that into the movie, because it doesn't give you a lot. Where it's like, okay, yeah, this guy's lack of being a successful writer, whatever's standing in his way of doing what he wants to do professionally, is what's causing this.
Right, and he's taking it out on the person closest to him, very common human tale, right? Person that can take the abuse and be the punching bag for his own inadequacies. I think that there's probably something, well, I don't think there's something deep to that. I think something profound about that. What do you think of Shelley Duvall's performance in this? To me, it seems, I don't know if it's as controversial as I think it is, but it seems to me to be uneven. There are scenes where I'm like, wow, she's so good in this. Like the scene with the doctor where she's smoking the cigarette, like that's one shot, right? And it's really awesome. The cigarette's like slowly burning, and there's like a great performance there, and she's good there. And then there are performances where she's walking around the hotel, and certainly at the end during the chase scene and all that, I think she's really great. But then there are scenes where I'm like, what the fuck? This is so bad. Like, I can't. And the scene that comes to mind for me, and it is the radio scene where she's talking and she's like, da 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 over. Da. And I'm like, what is this? Like, I don't understand this performance. What are you doing? What is it? If I were, I'd be like storming around the set if I were Kubrick. If this, what is this? You kidding? I understand she's nice. She's got a sweet affect. She's just a nice woman, but it doesn't come off as natural. So I think she just, unlike, I think, all the other performances, not that there are many others, there are really only 3 other primary performances. I think if there's one negative I would take out of The Shining, it's like that she's not more even. And I don't know if that's a common complaint or not. Again, I'm not super familiar with the depths of both contemporary and modern Kubrick and Shining criticism, but to me that has always stood out to me since the very first time I saw the movie. I'm like, she's not on the level of Jack Nicholson, and you need someone on the level of Jack Nicholson. I don't really understand the point of this. What do you think?
I think that's really fair to say. I mean, I was really trying to examine that because you have somebody like Nicholson. Dude, I looked back at his filmography. This was like the 35th or 36th movie he did. His filmography dates back to like the 50s. I didn't realize like I knew he did Chinatown. I knew he did The King of Marvin Gardens. I knew he did Cuckoo's Nest by this point. He did Easy Rider. He did 5 Easy Pieces, but I didn't know he was like, almost 40 films into his career at this point. The other funny thing I was thinking about Nicholson, which was interesting, was that I didn't realize that, if you think about it, oddly, he was only 9 years away from doing his turn as the Joker in 1989 Batman. Less than a decade away, which is so interesting to think about.
Definitely.
But Nicholson comes with, he's such a flavor now, but even back then, he has a very distinct style. He's very dynamic. He has a high energy. He's one of those guys that you just can't take your eyes off of. Because of his performance, his look, the very sharp triangular eyebrows, his smile, his sinister smile. So it's almost like a little unfair to put anyone, short of like Meryl Streep up against Jack Nicholson, especially at this time. But the performance you're calling out, she was an opposite Jack Nicholson. And that is a very campy sort of scene where she's like, like she's almost performing like a play. And a play that's, intended to be a little bit campy or cheesy, and then she'll do a scene where she's really, where she really feels like, you're really channeling that exhaustion, that desperation, the horror, the shock. She's so good. I know, back then she was nominated for a Razzie Award. I don't really see that. I think she works as a whole in the movie because Shelley Duvall is really an odd duck. She has a really eccentric or unique quality to her. I don't know if it's her physique, how tall she is, her very specific, the way her face looks. She's like no one else. She has a very distinctive presence in the movie. And I think that kind of ties into the character of this young, sort of meek, pushed around wife who's, I think, probably trying to keep an even keel for the sake of the child and just kind of going with the flow and trying to give it the old college try, despite the fact that she probably knows deep down that this marriage is not going to last. I don't know that she knows at this point that her husband's going to try to murder her family, but I think it's easy to say, it's probably best to say that she's probably pursuing a little too much optimism at this point and trying to keep everything going despite her husband's, sort of rapid descent downhill. And I think that probably works for the performance for me for the most part. It's also interesting to see, like, she is the pushover, I think, until that confrontation at the typewriter when she discovers the pages. All work, no play makes Jack a dull boy. One of the best discoveries, one of the best sort of tells in movie history when she's rifling through that ream of pages where it's all written the same shit on there. I love it. I mean, that's writing, that's storytelling. I think from that moment on, when she knocks Jack down the stairs with that baseball bat, there's a turn from sort of pushover wife giving it the old college try to protective mother lion, where it's like she's going to do there's still a trace of that meek Wendy where she, he's talking to her from the walk-in pantry, and he's like, she's like, yes, instead of running away. But from that moment on, she was in mother bear mode, and it's cool to see that turn where she's completely, ready to sacrifice everything, including herself, for that kid, and I think that's a very convincing performance. But, it's everybody knows. I mean, look at her on the Dr. Phil show. I mean, Kubrick ran her through the ringer to get this performance out of her. And who knows, maybe those other parts where she's talking to the park rangers and it's not really gelling and the performance seems a little phoned in, maybe she's exhausted at that point. Like, that was literally the best she had. Like, she's delirious at that point. Because I know they didn't film this in continuity, so I don't know the shot order as far as their schedule went. So who knows, man? But, just looking back, it's such a legendary performance because that this took a psychological toll on her in real life doing this part. And, she would be in Robert Altman's Popeye opposite Robin Williams the same year that came out in 1980. And then she did Annie Hall. She did a few movies before, she was already kind of making her way before The Shining, but she hasn't done, I think she fully retired 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think she's out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, she never did another performance quite like this, but I'll always, I think it's one of those things where I can't even imagine anybody else in the role.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think it just goes to show how good the movie is. It almost fits in. There's a camp to the movie and like you said, in the color schemes and almost some of the impossibilities of the aesthetic and all of that I think is maybe a little bit of like B acting lens to that in some way. I don't know if that was the intent. I doubt it. It's just surprising knowing how exacting Kubrick was, where you see some of these takes and how many takes they did where I'm like, that's the best take of her doing that.
It is interesting.
Insanity. It doesn't really make any sense. I wanted to ask you about Scatman Crothers, of Transformers fame, of course, but he plays Dick, the chef. This is an interesting character too. I don't know why I've never picked up on this. I think I'm just so enamored with the negative space in this movie that I'm not always paying attention to like the actual beat to beat stuff. But I love that scene where he kind of realizes that, or I guess he's shining with Danny, and so he figures out a way to get them alone. I don't think I ever really realized that was what he was doing. In other words, it wasn't that he was really just being left with him, but that it was kind of fulfilling his own goal of being able to talk to him privately, which I really liked. And then I love all the scenes with him in Miami or down in Florida, wherever he is. It's great. I don't understand I don't know what you make of the naked black women on his walls. Like I would be curious to know what the prevailing theories are on that. But talk to me a little bit about that performance and that character. I think he's really excellent. He obviously ends up being murdered, which is sad, but talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, Scatman Crothers, dude. Can you think of a better voice? I mean, you think of James Earl Jones. Who else do you think of? You think of those iconic voices, right? I'll always think of The Shining, and I'll think of Jazz from Transformers. Iconic, but Hong Kong Phooey. I was looking at Hong Kong Phooey this morning. Very racist character. I mean, not good. I was looking at Hong Kong Phooey t-shirts. I think I don't know, one of the websites had it on there.
Yeah, I'm looking now.
Threadless or something, and I was like, I can't get a Hong Kong Phooey t-shirt. It's just not a good look.
Is it? I mean, is it racist? Like,
I don't know. Yeah, like Hong Kong Phooey.
I'm looking at the character. Like the character's not really racist looking.
Yeah, I don't think
the character, in fact, would be more racist looking. I'm actually surprised that the character is not as more racist than considering.
It's
the time
true.
period.
He didn't talk with like an Asian affect or anything,
and he doesn't have like slanted eyes or something like that.
Yeah.
You'd expect it to have like some dramatic or like big teeth or like some ridiculous.
That's definitely true.
So like, I think you can get away with. I think you can get away with it.
Too hard on it. What is the story there? He's like a janitor who becomes Hong Kong Phooey, like secretly. That's his Clark Kent to his Hong Kong Phooey superhero power or whatever. But I always
so long. It's so funny.
Oh, I love Hanna-Barbera. I love old Hanna-Barbera. I could go down that rabbit hole for ages. But he's so good in this because, and I think. I recently found out he was really good friends with Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson is the one who kind of sold him to Stanley Kubrick and said, you got to put Crothers in this role. It'll be amazing. And then looking back at the filmographies, those two did The King of Marvin Gardens and Cuckoo's Nest together. So they had a bunch of films. So they probably formed a fast friendship at some time in the 60s or 70s. And then, so they get to, but they they get to act opposite each other in like only a couple of scenes in the film. But this character is great because he has that kindly grandfather type warmth, or that, beloved uncle. He's the mentor. He's the character who could really relate to the kid because he has the same power. And he's the one who Danny finds out through that other people out there are like him. So he's a great comfort in that way. And, he seems genuinely good and genuinely like a caring dude. And you find out he's pretty much the only one that's gonna, not only does he know something's going afoul, like something's going wrong up there, but he's the only one that could probably help them. So this guy's kicking his feet up in Miami, he's not home for a long period of time, flies all the way back to Denver in a snowstorm, then has to drive 5 hours in a car in a blizzard up to Sidewinder, and then take a snowcat all the way up Sidewinder to the hotel. And then, he's traveling for like 2 days, immediately gets an axe right in his chest.
Yeah, just takes an axe. Yeah.
Drops just like that. It's the most mean-spirited thing of saying, like, that's Kubrick's telling you, like, that's it. This family's fucked. You know what I mean? Gets all the way up there only to die miserably and immediately at the hands of Jack. It's so shocking. Even when you watch it now and you've seen it before, it's like, oh shit. Like, he doesn't do anything to help. Like, the whole thing was futile. It was completely pointless in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I love that. I love the fact that it's like, again, that lack of or that ability to just pull punches. Like no punches are going to be pulled.
You know what I love about the character is just it's just a throwaway line, but he talks about his grandmother and how he used to talk to her. Now, I was doing just some rough math, rough age, time. Let's say people were aging rough back in the day. Let's say that Scatman is, I don't know, in his 60s at this point. I don't know. Is that
yeah,
accurate?
I think he's in his 70s.
In his 70s? Okay, so his grandma, so he was born in like the 19 teens, right, in this world. His grandmother, so his mother was born in the 90s, 1880s, something like that. Okay. So his grandmother, let's say 1890. So his grandmother was born in the 1870s or whatever. So okay. I was just doing this in my head because I was just like, it suggests this more Civil War era, 19th century era horror. And I was like, damn, dude, this is imagine a story about like slaves that discovered this power on a plantation or some community. It's like some crazy thing. And I was just thinking about that. So it brought this history to the skill, whatever it is, or the weird ethereal, I don't know, psychological ability that you have. It gives it these roots. And that's what I loved that, even though it's a throwaway line about it. It just suggests it's old. And it also suggests what he was talking about with Danny was that there are other people too. I don't know if Dr. Sleep gets into that. I assume maybe it does, but it seems like it does. So, all right. What else do I want to ask you about this? Oh, I wanted to ask you about a few aesthetic choices that I thought were interesting. What do you think of the constant use of fades between scenes? I think it's so weird because it looks so cheap. And I don't know what the intention is behind that. Like where the conversations keep going or but they just wipe them. And he does that by intent. So I'm curious what you make of that.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It's a stylistic choice. It's one of the few things in the film, I think, that don't hold up. It's very beholden to that time period and it didn't age well, the crossfade. I think the first crossfade in the movies when Wendy's talking to Danny about, Dad's going up to get this job. I'm going to go to the hotel and Danny doesn't want to go. And then it fades back to the second part of Jack's interview up there. It's a very odd choice with the dialogue kind of continuing over the fade. It's very old school. It didn't hold up. Now, I love some of the editing with those sort of abrupt cuts, like where it'll just cut to a title card and it'll say Tuesday with the musical sting. That held up great because it's almost like a jump cut, and it really is kind of a jump cut, and it's kind of a jump scare because it's like boom, and you don't expect it. The crossfades work the other way. They're a little too soft for I think they're a little too soft for the mood or the style of the film. They don't fit. It doesn't quite fit. It's so interesting that you identified that, because it really does stand out as a weak link in like this otherwise, I think, impenetrable armor. It reminds me of George Lucas's wipes that he did in Star Wars.
Right.
Where it's like, oh, that just stands out as like a very dated style. Unfortunately, that didn't age well. You know, the wipe. It feels very, it feels amateurish, actually.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you could have done a million different things there. You had to do the wipe. Like, nobody does wipes anymore. So that didn't age well. So it's that type of thing where you just got caught in the period. You know, you gotta resist those things.
You brought up the cards, the scene cards. What do you think of those? I like them because they don't communicate a consistent message. It'll say like, I think like a date or a time, and then it'll say like a day of the week, and then it'll say like a season. And I like that it adds a sense of chaos to it. I don't know if you picked up on that as well.
That's a good take. I wasn't thinking about it that way. I'm actually quite curious about that. I meant to write them all down, but I forgot. I remember the interview. I remember Tuesday as like the first jump cutty one.
Right. Like the interview, Tuesday, winter, like things like whatever, as opposed to there being a consistent, like we're going to present the seasons or we're going to present the weeks or just random dates. It just seems like chaos. Like it's not telling you anything. It's not telling you the same sorts of things.
That's a great take.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's funny. You can't really read into them. For me, on the outside, initially it would feel like, all right, you're trying to it's based on a book. You're making it like a chapter header, like a chapter title. Like it feels like a novel, but I'm not sure why Kubrick would want to do that. And it is also interesting because he's such an expert at showing and not telling that they're pretty much unnecessary in a way. They're a nice divider if you're jumping, if you have to show the passage of time, it's a nice divider. But it is interesting because it does seem unnecessary. But I think that's probably the best take on it, is that it seems chaotic. Like you don't know they're always different. So you don't know what quite to make of it. It kind of, it disorients you a little bit. And I think Kubrick is the king of disorientation. I think he wants you to be disoriented in this movie because he wants you to feel like you're trapped in the hotel with these people.
I have a list of them. And they're not quite as chaotic as I thought, but they are inconsistent. The interview, closing day, a month later, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Monday, Wednesday, 8 a.m., 4 p.m. Those are the...
Wow, there's a lot that... I would say I probably even tuned them out after a while. Isn't that odd? I didn't know there were so many. I think I'm so engrossed. Isn't that weird? Like I'll just completely miss them. Like I'm just so engrossed in what I just saw, or why did he put that in the frame, or that type of thing. It's, oh man, it's so, I cannot think of another movie. Even I think a Clockwork Orange, I think a Full Metal Jacket, I think a Eyes Wide Shut, even another Kubrick film. I cannot think of another movie with more intentional detail in every frame. And again, sometimes it's for color, sometimes for shot composition, sometimes it's there, to tell a story. Why is Jack reading a Playgirl? It's all intentional. There's nothing on accident in a Stanley Kubrick film. It's all for us to tell a story or flesh out a character or for us to pose a question, whatever it is. But I think it could be, I think I could watch this movie another 2 times this week and get even more out of it. Like it's almost, I don't want to say intimidating or infuriating. It's almost annoying in a way where it's like, I know I'm not getting everything out of this until I watch it another time, or you can never get everything out of it and just watching it a couple of times. There's just too much. It's just chock full of detail.
It really is. And
yeah, it really is.
I wanted to ask you about, as we begin to wrap up, about a few of your favorite aesthetics that we haven't discussed yet. For instance, the iconic rug, that rug design. I think everyone just fundamentally understands and sees that in places, and people have it sometimes intentionally. The blood coming out of the elevators. I was curious what you thought of that scene. That's an iconic red rum being murder spelled backwards, of course, is a cool little payoff as well. And my favorite shot, actually, in watching the movie again, is I love the scene in the bathroom, like the red bathroom with the white trim, just absolutely stunning. That the acting is top notch between the two players, and it's just beautiful. So I want to point out a few of those things. Of course, the gold room is awesome as well. Is there anything that stands out to you that you wanted to focus in on?
I heard recently that bathroom was not a set. That's an actual Frank Lloyd Wright designed bathroom at a Frank Lloyd Wright designed house somewhere. I'm not even sure where that was, but that is a stark. That red, man. I was recently looking at a new car. I forget what model it was, but it had red leather interior, and I thought it was such a throwback, and it was such a bold choice, right? I was like, what? Red leather interior, like a stark, bright red, cherry red leather interior. But you named some of the great ones. The blood with the elevator is amazing. But I would have loved, I don't know what bothers me about it, but I think it's gorgeous. And the way there's so much that the couches and the armchairs start to be picked up. It's so cool. In slow-mo like that. It's so gorgeous to look at. But I would have loved to see the elevator doors open and the blood then come pouring out so you could see the blood filter out of the elevator. That would have been really cool. Like, in other words, to have giant tanks in there that would just or bladders that could actually spill. That would have been even cooler to me. As we see it now, you see it come out of the bays, which I guess kind of in a way is more mysterious. And I love the way it looks like a face with the floor gauges above the doors and stuff. I think you named some great ones. I think my favorite all-time image in this film, I love all the dolly shots. I mean, I love the steady cam and the dolly shots of Danny riding the big wheel around the hallways.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I mean, it's
dope.
Absolutely iconic. With that kid, that big wheel, that bowl hairstyle, the decor of the hotel and the colors. But I think the number one thing for me is the Grady twins standing in the hallway. It's completely ineffectual in a way, but for some reason, those two little girls in those robin's egg blue period dresses just standing there and sometimes talking with that sort of electronic synthesis over their voices or whatever. So it's just an image that becomes ingrained. I did a whole series of paintings on them. Like, I think I sold most of them, but like 30 years ago, well, not 30 years ago, like 15 years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago. And I think that was cathartic. I think I just had to get it out because it's like one of those things that just kind of haunts you in a good way. It's so brilliant. And I love the story behind that. It was going to be one little girl, and then that casting call was going bad. And then some mom brought in her twins, and they were like, no, we got to use both kids. Of course. Like, that's the creepy bit. Like that's
fundamentally
it was like a happy
scary.
accident.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
So
that's
cool.
fun. Yeah. It's great. It's fundamentally a scarier thing anyway, even though there's a contradiction in the movie, because I think he says the girls, when he's telling the story about what happened in 1970, he tells about how they were 10 and 8 or something like that. I think he says the girls.
Yeah, that's a thing too. Like, there's inconsistencies. At one point in the conversation with Jack and Grady in the bathroom, one of them says daughter. They say daughters a bunch of other times. And I wondered with filming and continuity, like, did they know there was going to be twins at the point that they shot that part of the conversation? I'm not sure. But another thing that's odd, like, it's weird to see even things get past Stanley Kubrick. And I think that's making a 2.5 hour film. It's like,
I think something did get past him, and it's something that bothers me. I wanted to ask you about this, which is, because I can't imagine what the intent would be other than, I guess, sharing a name. Is that twice Jack orders bourbon, and he is served Jack Daniels, which is not bourbon. Jack Daniels is not bourbon. Like,
that is clearly bourbon. That would be
a complete. Yeah, that would be a complete faux pas to get served Jack Daniels if you ordered bourbon. That's not bourbon. It's Tennessee whiskey. Right. Yeah, bourbon is a type of whiskey, and so too is Jack Daniels. It's its own type of whiskey, Tennessee whiskey. It's not bourbon. They're not even really that closely related. They don't taste the same. Oh, Jack Daniels is gross. And I just noticed that, and I was like, is that intentional because it's Jack Daniels or something? But I'm like, that's not bourbon. Like, and that bothered me because it was like, for such an exact.
I didn't even catch that. That's a great point. Yeah, maybe Kubrick wasn't a drinker.
Yeah. Could be. Who knows? So it's something I wanted to throw out there as well. One last question I wanted to ask you, and we can, of course, touch on anything that you'd like to talk about before we go, is how do you think the situation was found by outside people? Like, the blood coming out of the elevator, did that happen? So like that, I think that actually happened. Or in other words, I feel like some things happened, some things didn't. It's possible. Maybe some people died and some people didn't. I don't know. I'm just curious how you think it was found. Like what situation they found it in. Was there, would they have found the path of destruction with the axe and all of that? Would they have found the dead body of Dick and all of the rest of it? I'm just curious what you think. Or if you've never thought of that.
That's a great question. Yeah, because how much of it is hallucination? How much of it really happened? How much of it was a psychotic vision, a fantasy, a waking nightmare? All these. Yeah, I know. That's interesting. I mean, you have to think Dick Halloran is dead. I mean, you have to think in order to glean what Stanley Kubrick did say about the movie, and just kind of leaving the book out of the equation for a moment, that he did become homicidal. He did kill Mr. Halloran. Danny and Wendy do escape in the snowcat. I guess they'll get back down to the Tony Burton character, Durkin. You know, they'll get back down the Sidewinder to where Scatman got the snowcat from. But yeah, that's an interesting thought. Like, how much of it did the blood really gush out of the elevators? I'm thinking it didn't. Now, I'll tell you a little piece, and for you guys, I don't want to spoil the book or the movie for you, so don't listen to this. But there is a thing that comes to light, I think, with the advent of Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel novel and the sequel movie, that The Shining, this sort of rarefied, obscure psychic ability, is actually with, kind of visions to the future, and maybe you could see glimpses of what's going to be, and also empowers you to see the past. What it actually is this ability of channeling your future self, which comes back to warn you about certain things that are going to transpire in your life. So in other words, little Danny had this Tony character that he said lived in his mouth and hid in his belly. What Tony actually was future Danny warning him about shit. So in other words, your future self psychically channeling back and communicating to you in order to warn you about stuff. So if you knew that, then you could seeing visions of these ghosts, the dead twins, the blood in the elevator, whatever else, the woman in the bathtub, whatever else happens to Danny in the book. He's like assaulted by a fire extinguisher in the book, and things that are left out of the movie. Like, all of those things were warnings of what could happen if you don't abide by what I'm telling you. Like, Tony's telling Danny, like, I don't want to go to the hotel. And Danny's like, why? Well, I'm not going to tell you why. Just don't go, like, type of thing. So I guess, although it's less fun to say this, I guess those things never really happened. Those are just visions that haunted the people that saw those things, but those leave interesting questions too, because there's a whole theory about Wendy. Was Wendy the woman that was trapped in here with us? Was Wendy the one, saying like she was the crazy woman trapped in here with us? Was that actually Wendy? There's a whole theory about that. But if Wendy doesn't have the ability to shine, and in the book, Danny, Mr. Halloran, and Jack have the shining. And maybe they're saying Jack shines too in the film. I'm not sure about that. It's a little more obscure. But if Wendy doesn't have the ability to shine, why did she see the vision of the dog dude pleasuring the other guy, the butler guy, on the bed? Why did she see that towards the end, right?
Maybe it's like some sort of situational thing or geographic thing, as well. Who knows?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Brought into this curse just by virtue of being in proximity to it. I have no idea. It's interesting. It makes me really want to go into because again, I try to dodge doing too much research, reading too much, ruining things or whatever, but this is one of those things I really need to dive back into. I'd like to watch that documentary again to start, and Room 237, and just see where I'm at with that. Is there anything else, Dave, that we didn't bring up that you want to discuss before we go?
That documentary is great. I haven't seen that in a long time either. I'd love to see it. There is one more documentary. Right now, it's currently available on YouTube. Hopefully it stays there. I think it might have been originally made for Netflix, so it might be there too. It's called The Film Worker, I think. And it's about Leon Vitali, who starred in Barry Lyndon years ago and then went on to become Stanley Kubrick's assistant. He was kind of an AD, an actor. He played Red Cloak in Eyes Wide Shut. He was a gopher. Like he was an editor. He did everything for Stanley. He was like Stanley's right-hand man for the last 25 or 30 years of Stanley Kubrick's life. And it's a really interesting account of Kubrick and his projects and his family and sort of an inside glimpse into his genius. Super, super cool. The other thing that I thought of with this, Kyle, that I wanted to just give a nod to the score and the music. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but it's one of those movies where I think, you know, in like a filmmaking 101 class, you would say, all right, look at the opening of The Shining with the music that accompanies that helicopter shot flying up the mountain. And there's this eerie, foreboding music. Now play some really happy upstreet music, the intro to Sesame Street or whatever. The music, the movie, everything takes on a whole different tone just based on the musical accompaniment. Definitely. And I think this film, more than anyone I could think about, the music ties into the mood and the atmosphere and the tone of the movie more so than anything I could think of. Like the music and the sound effects, the audio in general, is just a perfect companion to the visuals, more so than anything really I could think of. It's like the perfect harmony, the perfect melding of those two things, where I think a lot of times music is, you know, it's kind of plopped on top. Maybe it's an afterthought, you know, type of thing. And I think this is the exact opposite. Like music is just as important. The music and the audio and the oral elements are just as important as the visuals and the acting and the framing and the camera work. And it's so lush. Again, it feels like a feature film to me. That moving camera, I know the moving camera could be very gimmicky, the steady cam, but it just feels, the movie feels so alive. And it just seems like it's one of those projects. It's one of those movies where it just feels like they went all out with every shot. Like they filmed each shot back to back the best they possibly could. Like there's no way they could have juiced any more quality from this thing. And I think that's rare. I mean, that's why this film lives in rarefied air. And I think that's why we'll be talking about it for decades to come. It's really a masterpiece. I know they say every Kubrick project is a masterpiece, and that's probably true. But I think this is just beyond a masterpiece of horror. I think this is a masterpiece of film and a masterpiece of storytelling, you know, straight up.
Right on. Well, Dig, that was fun. It was good to reminisce really about 1980s Stanley Kubrick film The Shining, based on the 1977 Stephen King novel. Again, I rented it on Amazon Prime, but it's available to rent on Apple Plus as well. It's available on HBO if you have a subscription.
Right.
So go check that out. I'm sure you can find it elsewhere as well. And of course, physically, if you're into that
sort of thing. Go check it out. Go check it out.
I'm sorry to differ with you, sir, but you are the caretaker.
You've always been the caretaker.
All right, my friend, let's end this episode of Knockback as we always do with a dad joke.
All right. I'm going back. I'm leaning on my old friend James Ketchum here. We got to start paying this guy for dad jokes. Hey, he sends good ones.
Yeah, good.
All right, James. James says, Carl, I saw a man at the store today buy a single cherry and a microphone. He bought a bing, bought a boom. That's so bad.
That's awful. That's an awful one. That's one of the worst ones.
Bing, bada boom. I think it's so bad that it might be one of the best ones.
Yeah, it's meta in that way.
It works both ways.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Dagan, for your time. And thank you all out there, as always, for your time, your love, your consideration, your support on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia for more Knockback, more Sacred Symbols, more Defining Duke. You know the drill. Merch, laststandmedia.store as well if you are interested in shirts, stickers, free domestic shipping on all stickers, etc., etc. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. Knockback, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.